What started as routine mockery became a lesson in respect that no one would ever forget. Sarah Chin stood at the front desk of Fort Bradley's firing range, clutching a worn visitor's pass in her small hands. At 5 feet 2 inches and barely 110 pounds, she looked like a strong breeze could knock her over. Her faded jeans and simple white t-shirt made her stand out among the military personnel in crisp uniforms. "I'd like to request some range time, please," she said softly to the desk sergeant. The sergeant looked up from his paperwork, taking in her appearance. "Ma'am, this is a military facility. Do you have proper authorization?" Sarah nodded, sliding a form across the counter. "My husband was Staff Sergeant Chin. This is part of his memorial service arrangement." Before the sergeant could respond, a booming voice cut through the air. "What do we have here?" Colonel Marcus Hoffman strode over, his chest full of ribbons and his face wearing that particular smile officers get when they think they're about to be entertained. At 6 feet 4 inches with shoulders like a linebacker, he towered over Sarah. "A civilian wants range time," the sergeant explained. Colonel Hoffman's smile widened. Well. And what exactly does a little lady like you plan to do with military weapons?" Sarah's voice remained steady despite the colonel's condescending tone. "I'd like to fire my husband's service rifle, sir." It's what he would have wanted." The colonel let out a hearty laugh that echoed through the building. "Sweetheart, do you have any idea what you're asking for? That M4 carbine isn't a toy. It's got a kick that would knock you flat on your back." Other soldiers had started to gather, drawn by the colonel's loud voice. Sarah could feel their eyes on her, some amused, others uncomfortable with their commanding officer's display. "I understand it's a powerful weapon, sir," Sarah said quietly. "But I'd still like to try." Colonel Hoffman slapped his knee. "This is rich. Lady, that rifle weighs almost as much as you do. You probably can't even lift it properly, let alone fire it accurately." He turned to the growing crowd of soldiers. "Boys, we've got ourselves some entertainment today. This little flower thinks she can handle military hardware." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel from the soldiers. Most looked embarrassed by their colonel's behavior. But Hoffman was just getting started. "Tell you what, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with false kindness. "I'll make you a deal. You can have your range time, but when you fall over from the recoil, don't come crying to me. Maybe we should get you a .22 instead, something more your size." Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained calm. "The M4 will be fine, sir. That's what my husband used." "Your husband, huh?" The colonel's tone turned slightly nasty. "Let me guess, he was probably supply or admin. Real soldiers don't let their wives play with guns." That's when Sarah's eyes flashed, just for a second. "My husband was a sniper, sir. 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment." The colonel's smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "Rangers? Well, that explains the delusion. You probably think some of his skills rubbed off on you from pillow talk." More uncomfortable shifting from the soldiers. Even they knew the colonel had crossed a line. "All right, let's get this comedy show started," Hoffman announced. "Set the lady up at lane 5. Standard targets at 100 yards. This should be over quick." As they walked toward the range, the colonel kept up his commentary. "You know, ma'am, there's no shame in backing out. Military weapons aren't designed for delicate hands. Maybe you should stick to cooking and cleaning. I'm sure that's what your husband really wanted." Sarah stopped walking. When she looked up at the colonel, something in her expression made him take a half step back. "Sir," she said quietly, "I think you might be surprised." The firing range fell silent as Sarah approached lane 5. The M4 carbine lay waiting on the bench, black metal and polymer, designed for war, not for small women in faded jeans. Colonel Hoffman positioned himself where everyone could see him, arms crossed, that condescending smile still plastered on his face. "Remember, sweetheart, safety first. Don't be ashamed when you can't even shoulder it properly." Sarah picked up the rifle. Her movements were fluid, practiced. She checked the chamber, tested the weight, examined the sights. Her hands moved with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. "Ha," muttered one soldier. "She actually knows how to hold it." Colonel Hoffman's smile dimmed slightly. "Beginner's luck. Wait until she tries to fire it." Sarah settled into position, the rifle nestled against her shoulder like it belonged there. She adjusted her stance, controlled her breathing, and peered through the scope. The range was dead quiet. She squeezed the trigger. Crack. The shot echoed through the facility. Sarah absorbed the recoil without moving an inch, smoothly working the action for the next shot. Crack, crack, crack. 3 more shots in rapid succession, each one controlled, each one deliberate. Colonel Hoffman's smile was completely gone now. "Cease fire," called the range master. "Checking targets." The electronic target system displayed the results on the overhead monitor. 4 shots. 4 perfect bullseyes. Not just in the center, dead center, grouped so tightly they almost looked like one hole. The range fell silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. Sarah set down the rifle and turned to face the colonel. His face had gone pale. "Not bad for a delicate flower," she said quietly. One of the younger soldiers whispered, "Holy shit." "Language," the sergeant muttered back, but his voice carried awe, not discipline. Colonel Hoffman cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "Lucky shots. Anyone can get lucky once." Sarah's eyes never left his face. "Would you like me to continue, sir?" Before he could answer, she turned back to the bench. This time, she adjusted the target distance to 200 yards. Then 300. Then 500. Each time the same result. Perfect accuracy. Shots grouped so tightly that seasoned marksmen in the crowd started shaking their heads in disbelief. "This isn't possible," Colonel Hoffman muttered. "Sir?" The range master approached hesitantly. "I think you should see this." He handed the colonel Sarah's visitor authorization form. As Hoffman read it, his face went from pale to red to ashen. "Mrs. Sarah Chin," he read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "Widow of Staff Sergeant David Chin, 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. Killed in action, Afghanistan, 2019. He looked up at Sarah, then back at the form. Civilian marksmanship instructor. Former competitive shooter. National champion, precision rifle, 2015, 2016, 2017. The silence stretched like a held breath. Winner, International Sniper Competition, 2018. Invited participant, U.S. Army Marksmanship Unit Training Program. Colonel Hoffman's hands were shaking slightly as he continued reading. Certified instructor for Military Spouse Marksmanship Program. Currently holds 12 national records in precision shooting. He looked up at Sarah, who was calmly cleaning the rifle with movements that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cracking slightly, I didn't know." Sarah finished cleaning the rifle and set it down carefully. When she turned to face the colonel, her expression was calm but firm. "Sir, you didn't know because you didn't ask. You saw a small woman and assumed weakness. You heard, civilian, and assumed ignorance. You made every judgment except the right one." She picked up her purse and prepared to leave. "My husband didn't die so that officers could mock the families of fallen soldiers. He died believing in honor, respect, and the idea that everyone deserves a chance to prove themselves." Colonel Hoffman opened his mouth to speak, but Sarah wasn't finished. "I didn't come here to embarrass you, sir. I came here to honor my husband's memory. He taught me everything I know about shooting. Said it was important for a soldier's wife to be able to protect herself and others." She walked toward the exit, then paused. "He also taught me that true strength isn't about size or volume. It's about precision, discipline, and respect for others." The colonel stood frozen as Sarah headed for the door. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice completely different now. "Please wait." Sarah stopped but didn't turn around. Colonel Hoffman walked over to her, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. A big one." He looked around at the soldiers watching, then back at Sarah. "I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. I disrespected you, your husband's memory, and everything this uniform is supposed to stand for." Sarah turned to face him. "I let my assumptions cloud my judgment," he continued. "I acted like a fool and I'm sorry. Your husband would be proud of what you just did here." Sarah studied his face for a long moment. "Sir, apology accepted. But I hope you'll remember this the next time you meet someone who doesn't fit your expectations." Colonel Hoffman nodded. "Ma'am, would you consider coming back? Maybe giving some instruction to our soldiers? I think we could all learn something from you." A small smile crossed Sarah's face. "I'd be honored to, sir. But next time, maybe ask about someone's qualifications before you assume they don't have any." Word of the incident spread through Fort Bradley within hours. The story of the little lady, who outshot everyone on the range, became legendary. But more importantly, it became a teaching moment. Colonel Hoffman called a base-wide meeting the next day. Standing before hundreds of soldiers, he did something that required more courage than any battlefield maneuver. "Yesterday I made a mistake," he announced. "I let prejudice and assumptions guide my actions. I disrespected a Gold Star widow and embarrassed this entire unit in the process." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Sarah Chin is a national champion marksman who graciously agreed to honor her fallen husband at our range. Instead of treating her with the respect she deserved, I mocked her. I was wrong and I'm sorry. The room was silent. Effective immediately, Mrs. Chen will be offering monthly marksmanship clinics for any soldier who wants to improve their skills. I'll be the first to sign up. 3 months later, Sarah's marksmanship program had a waiting list. Soldiers from across the state came to learn from the little lady, who had become one of the most respected instructors in the region. Colonel Hoffman, true to his word, attended every session. He never became as skilled as Sarah, but he learned something more valuable: the importance of respect, humility, and never judging a book by its cover. Sarah's triumph wasn't just about perfect marksmanship. It was about dignity in the face of disrespect, grace under pressure, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing your worth regardless of what others think. She didn't need to raise her voice or make threats. She simply let her actions speak louder than the colonel's words ever could. The soldiers who witnessed that day learned something crucial. True strength comes in many forms. Sometimes it's a small woman with steady hands and a steady heart. Sometimes it's the courage to admit when you're wrong. Sometimes it's the wisdom to look beyond first impressions. Colonel Hoffman learned that leadership isn't about intimidation or assumptions. It's about recognizing excellence wherever it comes from and treating everyone with the respect they deserve. And Sarah? She learned that sometimes the best way to honor someone's memory is to stand up for what they believed in, especially when it's difficult. The colonel's smile didn't last long that day, but the lesson he learned will last a lifetime. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you looked? Have you ever made assumptions about someone that turned out to be completely wrong? Share your story, someone out there might need to hear it.